That's the one there.
One there,
in
is
the
it?
Yeah.
No, I can't see
Well,
that.
he'll talk to me, though.
Yeah.
You don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But that's their jobs.
Now I know you want the Unibet bit to stick out as much as possible.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Seven Barrows, one of the sort of, I don't know, holy grail destinations of jump racing. We're here at Nicky Henderson's, a man who has taken Cheltenham by storm and many other things by storm down the years. And Nicky, really, you've become a very polished media performer, but your first outing into the newspapers was somewhat unplanned and I think probably quite costly to your, quote, education career, unquote. Tell us about it. Where were you and what happened?
Well,
You were at Eaton, weren't you?
I was
It was obviously very easy to get into in those days.
Yeah. Well, it was pretty simple. It had to be easy to get into, I tell you.
You had to make a cross on the application form and that was it.
The one thing you could do most bad things at Eaton, but actually racecourses were really, really frowned upon. But I had a marvellous tutor, Michael Kidson, who loved his racing, and we set off on St Andrew's Day, which was a big holiday at Eaton. We needed to go to Newbury to watch Arkle in the Hennessy.
Early 60s we there for
right, you're very good.
64-ish,
yeah.
I would think.
So we set off at his Morris Minor. We couldn't go into the members or anything like that because unfortunately my father was a steward. So we parked incognito and went down to the last fence. Which
It's a very long word for you, incognito. You must have learnt that at Eaton, I would think. Yeah, go on.
And we stood by the last fence and they came round and Arkle came round and they came to the last fence and it was Arkle and Stourbridge colonies giving about, well, I think it was £28.
35, memory serves, yeah. About what I've lost in the last week, but yeah.
And they jumped the last together, and anyway, actually Stourbridge colonists won. But we escaped back to Eaton, and nobody really knew where we were, except what was the unfortunate thing.
Except the member of staff who'd taken you, of course.
Yes, but that was all right. Nobody worried about that. There were three of us, and Arkle was the only horse in the world that could have possibly have got onto the. I think it was probably the back page or the front page. I forget which of the Sunday Times.
Yeah. King of newspapers in those days.
The one thing that was absolutely certain is the headmaster would have never have read or even heard of the racing. Well, what wasn't it? Was the Sporting Life at the time. He would never have seen it.
But he might have heard the Sunday Times.
But the Sunday Times he would have read, and all of a sudden there's this picture of this horse jumping the last fence at Newbury, but very blatantly in the middle of it there are three creatures that are rather, well, certainly one of them, i.e. our tutor, is quite recognisable. So I'm afraid on Monday morning was actually the only time during my rather indistinguished career at Eaton I actually managed to meet the headmaster.
You were summoned, presumably.
We certainly were, yes.
And presented with a picture of you whooping it by the last at Newbury.
Well, we actually escaped punishment, I think, and I don't think, I hope Michael didn't get too severely punished for this minor misdemeanour, but racing was very frowned on in those days. But
it was actually sort of in society generally. It was thought to be a bit fast.
And there was also a rule at the time that you could go out with your parents or whatever, but there was a 7-mile radius round the college, and you were not allowed to leave the 7-mile radius.
But you were with your parents in the sense that Dad was stewarding in the box, but you were trying to avoid him as well, because he'd have bollocked you too, wouldn't he?
I think he'd have quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, he would. And of course, what people don't realise with this magnificent career of yours is that you should have been warned off in your youth for misadventures in Australia. What they have picnic races, don't they?
The picnic races were rather akin to the point-to-point, really.
Right. But on harder ground, I imagine.
It certainly was. They were all 7 furlongs.
And you were what sort of age? You were out in Australia?
I was 20.
Right.
Yeah, I'd escaped
So
from...
there were pterodactyls flying around the sky.
Just
It was
about.
a long time ago.
It was very good spot. I had a wonderful time there. They had to come and get me back. I could have stayed forever. I was dragged home sort of to go to the city, which I didn't want to do. The Bong Bong picnic races.
The
was
Bong
rather,
Bong picnic.
The Bong Bong.
Yeah.
They were rather akin to sort of the Heathrow point to point.
Right.
It was a pretty. It was rather sort of a special sort of date in the Sydney.
It's a big day in
calendar.
the Aussie point-to-point picnic
that's right.
calendar, right?
Um,
And you were somehow riding something. Some
I used to go down to
lunatic had
Randwick.
put you up.
I was working in the Casno's office there at the time.
Casno's being a hugely posh financial institution which your family appeared to own in various ways at one time or another.
They didn't, but I was meant to be working in London. Luckily, they let me. I'd been to Australia before, and I wanted to go back, so they let me go and work in the office there and rode out. And
What did you do in the office? I always think of you as the commissionaire outside with the uniform on, because they wouldn't let you near the
there were
facts
only
figures.
three of us in the office in Sydney, so we didn't do an awful lot, and it was during the nickel mining boom.
Yes.
So while London was asleep, we were having an absolute bonanza, buying Poseidon and Tasmanex shares.
Poseidon,
and then
I remember that,
we
yeah.
bought them in the morning and sold them in the afternoon and told London we'd been doing nothing. They did. The Casnos in London didn't sort of believe in nickel mines and
No, because
shares
it's a bit
like
common,
that.
I would
It was
imagine.
a bit speculative.
Gold mines, fine.
Yes.
Nickel, a bit cheap and nasty. But anyway, you were obviously riding out for some poor victim of a
I
stable.
rode this horse in the, I think it was the first race. Every race was 7 furlongs out of a sort of cattle grid, upside down. And it was long before starting stalls. It was rather, actually, it was the most lethal thing. The riders, there were no rules.
No.
Absolutely none
And you as
whatsoever.
a sort of posh pom would be a great target.
Wet behind the ears,
Yeah.
Tom, you could be assured. And there was a great hill in the middle, so nobody could see what happened the first 3 furlongs.
excellent.
It was absolutely lethal. Anyway, I rode this animal in the first race. It was absolutely no good at all, and finished right down the field. And retired to have, as you say, picnic races is what they were. We had a picnic and a few tubies.
Tubies,
and
very
this and
important
that,
part of
very
picnic
important.
races.
That was part of it. And till all of a sudden there was a sort of tannoy later on in the afternoon
Would W
following
behind the ears,
jockeys.
Henderson, please.
Well, following jockeys returned to the weighing room, and the amazing thing about the 8th or 9th race was called the Consolation Stakes, and that was for any horse that hadn't finished in the first 3 or 4, I forget,
in the
earlier races could run again.
Right.
And so the said trainer was there. He said, "We'll run the horse again." Well,
And even more strange, put you up on it again. Yeah.
So I was summoned to get back on again, and it sort of dawned on me halfway down to the start that it was the same colour, but actually it was as fresh as paint, B, something quite
Totally different animal.
totally different to what I'd ridden in the first race. This thing duly bolted in. Won by a very large margin.
Even with you on it.
Even with me on it, it wasn't very difficult. Then we just jumped out the gate and went flat out for 7 furlongs. I think it was probably a track horse from Sydney. And it was really, it was an hysterical episode because...
And they presumably all had it off left, right and centre.
obviously
You
had
wouldn't
it
have had a
right,
brass
but
washer on it.
I was the first pom to ever ride a winner at the Bong Bong picnic races, to the point that I even sort of finished up on the sort of the equivalent of the Jimmy Young show the next morning.
The old dating or something. For people born after, I don't know, 1940, Jimmy Young was a famous disc jockey who sang about as well as he does. Yeah.
They were great days.
And
Good
you had to be dragged kicking and screaming back from Australia, didn't you? I was having a
Well, that was
riotous
time to go to. Then I was off to London and did a year and a half in the office there.
You weren't really cut out for the city, Nicky, were
Well,
you?
I think
I mean,
after
you
a
could
year and a
find
half-
it with the help of the tube map. But beyond that, it wasn't really you, high finance.
Lunch was important.
Yeah, lunch was important in
It
those
was
days.
indeed,
Yes.
yes.
Everyone went out for lunch about 2 or 3 hours. It's like being a trainer.
Well, nobody missed me because I was absolutely useless. So it didn't really matter whether I was there or not. But after about a year and a half, I think we decided that I didn't really need Casnos, and they certainly didn't need me. So Dad was very good. I mean, it was a difficult time, and he'd obviously always wanted me to do that, but Fred Winter, to be honest, came to the rescue.
And your dad was Johnny Henderson, who basically secured the future of Cheltenham Racecourse and many other services to the game. He put together the Cheltenham Steeplechase Company, I think, and
he founded originally to buy Cheltenham. I think it was for £360,000. The whole of.
Was that under his mattress, or was there some others involved?
He started it. He went to the city to raise the money.
Over lunch.
And to buy the whole racecourse, chock-a-block, to save it from development. And that's what he started up with a lovely man called Tommy Wallace, Racecourse Holdings Trust, which I think had a capital of literally £1, but I mean, there were shareholders. And it was a non-profit making organisation which...
Not unlike what you ran for many years before you started hitting the big time.
It was a loss-making operation. Profit didn't come into it. And that actually is now what is Jockey Club Racecourses. They amalgamated with United Racecourses, and consequently all the Jockey Club Racecourses were bought up by Dad's amazing foresight. Yes.
Yeah.
That
he was a visionary of his time, actually.
And Aintree was then his next project, and between them all, that's how those racecourses are all owned by racing.
So there is a Henderson who's done something for the game down the years.
Well, he does at least have a race in his memory, which we try and win every year, sometimes.
The Johnny Henderson Grand Annual, which is the only 2-mile sprint over fences run in the calendar. It's absolutely amazing.
Probably right, yeah.
And how did you, obviously Casanovas had decided that perhaps you were too powerful an intellect for them to handle, and decided to get the man out the door. How did we drift into racing and Fred Winter?
Well, I'd been... the deal really was to go to Cirencester and learn to be a farmer, and then maybe train some horses from home.
But people who go to Cirencester don't learn to be farmers.
Exactly.
They learn to drive posh cars and misbehave and drink in the local pubs.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I used to go to Fred Winter's every morning, ride out 2 lots.
What, straight on from the pub, or do you go home at all?
Well, we won't go into the nighttime activities.
No.
I'd go back. I'd come back to Lambourne, ride a couple of lots, and then go back to Cirencester and pretend I'd been to a lecture or 2 in the morning, and again lunchtime. Then came round again. So
Fred, ex-paratrooper, rider of Mandarin, fabulous jockey. I mean, I was only sort of 7 or 8 when he packed in, I think, but he was an Iron Man, and he was a tough boy. What did he make of Mr. Wet Behind the Ears cheating in pony races in Australia?
He was very good. I just went and rode out, but he knew that's what I really wanted to do, and he knew I wasn't sort of going anywhere where I was particularly sort of happy about, and changed to me, and actually a lovely guy called DC, Stephen Stanhope, was his assistant.
Who was quite a famous character, was he not? Something of a hellraiser,
he was. We had some great days.
Yes. And nights.
Yeah, correct. And he had been assistant there for quite a few years and was moving on. So Fred said, listen, I think you're sort of at a loose end. Why don't you come and join the team and do that? So again, I'd say with Dad's blessing, because everything was with his, because everything I have is thanks to him.
And were you close to, I mean, they were different days, it wasn't lots of hugs and kisses with children, but you were close to him, and he was close, a very decent man. But it was kind of arm's length close.
You had enormous respect for your parents, and I mean, I don't know how, it's not quite the same as, I don't think it is now, because I know who gets the better of who.
Yes.
with with my children, whereas with my father it was certainly, no, he was very good. And so off I went to, rented a cottage in Eastbury and did 5 years with Fred, which was tremendous, and it was riding.
Well, you rode a horse called Happy Warrior a lot. Which,
he was
which
my
must have
first
been
winner.
very good because you did really well on him.
The first time I rode him, I remember my mum saying he was sadly very shortly afterwards got killed in a hunting accident. But she did see me ride my first winner, which was probably one of the very few winners that Fred ever trained that started at 33 to 1.
Probably because of your presence on
top.
top. No.
It was the fact that there was this clown called Mr. N. Henderson that nobody had ever heard of.
Claiming 7, needing 77.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, it ran away with me for 2 miles around Kempton until we turned into the straight. And 2 jockeys, one was Tommy Stack, and the other was, I think he was called John Williams, a photograph out there. We're jumping we came off the last bend, and they screamed, "Get out of the way, you something amateur."
Yeah.
And so I did, and it had run away with me for a mile and a half. I was absolutely exhausted.
Knackered.
And I couldn't wait to pull up. And they screamed at me to get out of the way, which I duly did. And I hadn't the energy to left to sort of wave them by, but I let them pass. I thought, thank goodness that's all over. And then the old horse took off again. And he passed them, he joined them again at the last and won, which was...
Bet they were pleased.
Nobody knew what to make of it all. But that was sort of the start of it, really. That was... And, I mean, Happy Warrior was actually the sort of near again at the end he came in, when we won the Fox Hunters at Aintree.
Sure.
When the saddle...
The only year it's been a walkover, isn't it?
Yeah. I jumped the last upside Lord Daresbury, and a guy who's still going in Ireland called Boots Madden.
Yeah.
And he was on the horse that had won the Fox Hunters at Cheltenham, but the saddle had slipped round my horse's tail. I was sat on his tail. They wondered why I looked so bad. And I very, very nearly, I mean, the whole way from Valentine's, his neck got longer and longer.
Is that where it happened?
It happened just before the canal turn. And his neck was his head was getting further and further away, and I'm on a longer and longer end. And on the run-in, I was literally sort of going out that door or that door.
But you won.
It was entertaining stuff, but
it must be great exhilaration.
It was. All jockeys will tell you that in my day,
yeah,
they were unjumpable. AP will tell you can now go around and jump entry backwards.
Yeah, with a blindfold. Yeah,
yeah. But no, I had 5 years with Fred. I had 75 winners and won the Imperial Cup.
You did win the Imperial Cup. Yeah, good lord. Must have had good horses, Fred.
He did. Listen, he was champion trainer every year I was there, and that wasn't thanks to me.
And he was amazing because, soon after he set up as a trainer, he had the national in Anglo, wasn't it?
Anglo and the Tommy Crompton Smith's horse.
J Trump.
J Trump. Yeah. First 2 years. Yeah. I thought it was going to be easy. We were second in our first year. And I thought, well, surely we'll...
Was that Zongalira?
That was Zongalira.
Yeah. I thought then, now here is a man, winter trained, he's going to farm the Grand National down the years. Haven't been sighted since.
It's called 40 years on.
I mean, Nicky, you cut your teeth with Fred Winter, and he was quite a terrifying figure to a young journalist such as myself, and he didn't do interviews with the press. He rather took the view that he'd rather step in something on the pavement, and I kind of understand it. But after long negotiations, including a dinner in London, I was allowed to go to Uplands to interview, and we sat there, got there at about 10, and after about half an hour, he was obviously bored, said, I think it's time for a gin and tonic. Well, of course, I knew what tonic was, but gin was news to me. He said, it's all in the kitchen, fridge, but everything's there, you'll find it, glasses. So I walked in the kitchen, there was this wonderful parrot sitting there on its perch. And it took one look at me and it went away, shall we say, effed off through the stable door that was at the back of the kitchen. And so I made a couple of demonic gin and tonics, and took them back into Fred. And I said, Mr. Winter, sir, there you are. Love the parrot. He's gone off for a little fly. And he shot out of his chair, saying, he's what? Obviously, he'd never been out of the house. The last I saw of Fred and the family was down the bottom of the garden trying to entice this parrot out of a tree. And I thought, now, do I be brave and go and help, or do I just get in the car and go away? I got in the car and fled. And about 6 weeks later, I think the Hennessy meeting, he came up to me and said, well, no fault of your own, Mr. Down. This was from behind me. He said, you'll be pleased to hear the parrot is fine. But he never, ever let me forget it. Anyway.
He was a great man. He was. He was very, very good to me, and he rescued me, and it was great. As you say, he was a tough man. Oh. But the great thing
paratroopers tend not to be flower rangers. You know, he'd been a paratrooper, hadn't he?
Yeah. He was, and he was tough. He was the toughest jockey there ever was.
Unbelievable.
He was champion jockey 100 times, and champion trainer probably just as many. Yeah. But the day started, I mean, my first job, my probably only important job was to deliver the Sporting Life onto his table at 7 o'clock in the morning as soon as they'd arrived in the paper shop. And we'd sort of discuss, he'd read that and we'd discuss entries, and then first up, we didn't pull out till 7:45 in those days. But in the morning, the first thing in the morning, this was, I think Gruff would be.
Yeah.
There was no...
Fierce, Gruff, any of those?
I made my cup of coffee, he made his, we said nothing. I got marking the paper so he knew what was coming up, and I did all the sort of calendar work of the entries and things like that. And
it's quite good because there's a lot of reading and writing involved in that, Nicky.
Yes. And then the sort of bollockings would begin. It was just a question of who was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So you had Brian Delaney as head
Well, he was the legend, and I think if anything, if you said, where did you learn? I mean, Fred, you watch to learn, and I mean, Fred never said, I'm doing this because I want to do that. No. You sat there and you watched what he was, observed what he was doing. Brian Delaney was somebody I learned. You learned a lot of. He was he was his head lad, and he was his everything. Yeah. And he was the guy, as much as we have always done, and I had Corky for so many years.
To whom we'll get on, yes.
And sort of our job is to train the horses, but during which you are going to get problems. So basically, we break them, and they mend them, and feed them and everything. My next important job was on the way back into work at Evening Stables, was to call in the chemist to collect the Guinness, and the eggs, which were for Pendle.
Which was an Arkle recipe as well, Guinness and eggs, wasn't it?
But we always, and again, I had to arrive with the Guinness every night, and I don't know why we didn't buy a case of Guinness, I don't know why we didn't buy a barrel.
But I bet you spilt plenty in the pints.
The lads would have drunk it anyway, so that would have been pointless. I had various roles there, and as I say, Fred in the morning was tough. Then he'd suddenly say at 12 o'clock, right, we're going to go play golf. And we'd get Doug Marks, a wonderful character.
Great character.
From years gone by, or we'd go
racing.
He
was the bloke who hid up a tree, wasn't he?
It was, yeah.
To listen to what the lads and lasses were saying about that stupid
story
old so-and-so Marks.
That it's a tree that's up on the top of the downs there, and it was the wettest, filthiest morning of the year. And he told the lads to go up to the tree on the top of the 100 acres, we call it, and take a turn round there, and I'll come and meet you there. Well, actually, he didn't. He went up in bed and went and sat up in the tree, and then sat and listened to what the lads had
all
got to say.
Things they were saying about him.
So goes the story. Doug was a star. Fred was a star. And he improved as the day went on, until every night.
It could have been the gin and tonic at
no, but every night after work, I'd finish in the office and shut it up, gave him the entry book and whatever. And we'd always have a gin and tonic together. And a gin and tonic every night. Yeah. With Guy and Fred and the family. And I was part of the family. It was they were wonderful.
They're amazing lot. Yeah. And of course he had to put up with Frankham, because Frankham cut his teeth at at Fred's, and Johnny used to do a lot of driving for Fred, and Fred would be reading The Sporting Life in the passenger seat of some pretty smart motor car, and they'd have the radio on, and there was a programme then, as there still is actually, called Brain of Britain. And John would be driving, probably too fast as usual, and Fred would be sitting there reading the paper, and they asked the first question, who was the king of Albania? And John would go, Zog. And you could just, right, and you could just see the paper flicker apparently, and then John would miss the next couple of answers out, and then, you know, who was the bishop who came over with William the Conqueror to Hastings? Odo. John would go, and that was right. And the paper would flicker a bit more. Well, because what Fred didn't know, and he was never told by Franklin, was it was on a Sunday, Johnny would listen to it, and the repeat on the Tuesday, he knew all the answers, but he was clever enough not to answer everything because he'd be a smart ass.
They were great days. Johnny, I remember when Johnny first arrived.
What was he like then?
Johnny, the same as he is now, up to absolutely every trick in the book.
Yes.
Richard Pittman had taken over from Paul Kellaway, I think it probably was, when I first arrived. Richard was first jockey. He was very good to me too, Richard.
Nice fellow.
And lovely. But then Johnny arrived, and we had a great team. Vic Sohn, you might remember. And, you know...
And was Frankham different from day one?
Yeah,
or?
Totally. He arrived the same time as I did.
Right.
And he was...
From different ends of the educational spectrum, but he's incredibly clever, and so are you.
Yeah. Somebody paid a fortune to try and educate me, and it didn't...
And John left school at 9:30 in the morning, but still the cleverest fellow, no.
He was hysterical, and he was up to no good from the day one. He was up to every trick you could find, but he was highly entertaining. But the thing was, from day one, Fred realised he'd got something very, very, very special on his hands.
Did he ever say anything like...
Yeah, I remember him ringing up one night. We were in the office. He said he rang Dave Dick, who was his greatest mate.
Who was a great legend of the
he
time.
said to Dave, he said, Dave, he said, I want you to come over here. He said, I want to show you something. And Dave said, what, why? He said, just come over. We're schooling on Thursday. Can you come over Thursday morning, first thing, will you? I'm going to show you something. And this was Frankham schooling. And he changed the art of jumping a steeplechase fence from Fred's day and Dave Dick's day, when you just rode at it like a maniac that didn't care if you got killed, and just went down to it like it was a brick wall. It was absolutely exactly. There wasn't a lot of finesse about it. They were all the same. They were brilliant jockeys. But Frankham took it to a completely different level.
And they weren't born, they were quarried. They were tough.
Yeah, they were just, Johnny just took it to a completely different scheme. Because he'd done the show jumping, he could see strides everywhere. And, as I say, Fred got Dave to come over and watch that. And Fred knew instantly that this was something. I felt sorry for Richard because... you know, Johnny started claiming 7, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and he was blatantly going to.
He won races out in the country over fences that nobody else would dream of.
But the great thing is now that he sort of initiated that way of riding. I think the Dunwoodies and all that lot all followed suit, and it became a different game. And you'll see that now. I mean, watching Nico, great horseman, great man in the country, great man over an obstacle, and all the jockeys have to be. So was, you know, Mick was, and all the jockeys now can do it that way.
Franklin changed the landscape of jump jockeys.
He did.
Yeah,
he really did. Yeah.
He introduced finesse and polish in a sense. Now, he'd kill me now, and I spoke to him a couple of hours ago, he'd kill me now, say he wouldn't be the strongest from the last, but he'd already won the race 3 out.
Yes.
You know, but he was extraordinary to watch over a fence. For somebody like me, born in South London, Not admittedly the hardest part of it, I have to say, but to me, it was stupid cliche poetry in
It was
motion.
poetry.
Unbelievable.
Because he was as one with the horse. It was just
yeah.
you are going. The only thing that there was always the odd horse, and it still happens with a lot of jockeys from AP and things like that. There were a lot of horses, not a lot, a few horses that didn't suit.
Didn't
because
respond to
they
him.
wouldn't do what he asked.
Yeah.
Most of them would say, "Okay,
Yeah.
you're going to say 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yeah.
aren't you? Right, bang." And he knew it, but he could tell it miles out.
Yeah.
He could count it down from 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, bang. Some horses didn't like being told to do that, and
They weren't as
consequently-
clever as he
and They
was.
weren't exactly, and they'd have disagreements. But most horses, over hurdles or fences, it didn't matter. You know, the way he took them into a fence and went with them in a completely different position
Yeah,
to the old. I mean, you know,
two as one, weren't they?
Yeah.
Frankham
It was-
and whatever he was on,
Yeah.
2 as 1.
They were. It was great to watch.
There's quite enough of that because he's pleased enough about himself as he is. But your first yard was Windsor House, which you bought. Basically, it was a swimming pool with a few boxes. You bought it off Roger Charlton.
Roger and I were sort of in a batch of. We had a lot of fun in Lambourne in those assistant trainer days, because there were lots of assistants and young trainers, quite a few of them single. So there were plenty of boys to go. I mean, I couldn't cook an egg, so yeah, Roger and I'd go out. And, you know, we'd all go out and have a steak or something like that, or a boiled egg if anybody got one.
Or laid
And
one.
Roger basically said to me one night, I'd been at Fred's 5 years. It was a question of whether it was either time to move on or go and start training, really. I had been offered a few sort of roles elsewhere, but we were getting married then that year, and Roger just said to me one night, "I am fed up with just swimming these horses round and round in circles."
Because swimming pools for horses were quite a novelty
It was
in
very
those
new,
days. Yeah,
but the trainers
absolutely.
used to send them down.
Yeah.
Roger and Corky, who was
Yeah.
his head lad,
Yeah.
would swim them and mend them. They were sent there because they got problems.
Mm-hmm.
They'd send them back to the trainers, who won.
I used to get tired of swimming around that pool.
Yeah.
Go on.
It would win 3 days later. Trainer would say, "Wasn't I clever?" And in fact, it was Roger that had done all the work. They said, I'm getting quite bored with this. And Jerry McTree had asked him to go and be assistant at Beckhampton.
Yeah. And we're talking about what year did you buy
78.
Windsor House, right? And you therefore acquire Worrell and Brown
And Jimmy.
and Corky, who's still the best dancer in Lambourne, I'm told, at the age of 110 or whatever. He was with you how many years? Officially.
Well, he did 40.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The train robber's only got 30 years, Nicky, you know. But he was it's always struck me about you that you've never, long before the days of, quote, media relations, you've never been short of praise for your lieutenants, captains, privates, corporals, every level in the yard. You always hand credit to those who've done the graft.
Well, they have. And I mean, Corky knew something about what was going on when I started training. I knew absolutely nothing. So it was a matter of, I mean, the only way to learn is learn.
And did you get on from the first?
Yes.
Yes.
We had very, very seldom ever had an argument. We'd have a disagreement. I mean, I would say, "That's lame in its foot," and he said, "No, it's its knee." Yeah. Or "Well, I'll bet you £1 it's got this or it's got that." We might.
He said, "If you pay me £1, I'd do it." But yeah.
We'd have games like that. We hardly ever had I mean, he was family, and so was Johnny, and they were wonderful. And as I say, nothing changed for.
They were the part of the making of you.
Johnny retired. He'd done about 35, and Corky did 40, and it was automatic. We all knew what we were trying to do, and they were just.
But you would say you didn't know how to do it in those days, where they helped.
I haven't got a clue.
channel you towards it?
Well, Corky'd been with Fred in the first place anyway. He used to
Did he
look
ever
after
tell
Killer.
you you were any good at it, Corky?
I don't think we probably ever were, really. It was more by luck than good management, probably. But Corky was with Fred for a long time, and he looked after Killiney.
Gosh. Owned by Enid Boucher.
Enid Boucher.
Yeah, some animal.
And he was probably, I think, in their eyes in those days, probably the best of the lot.
Yes, yes.
And Corky looked after him.
Magnificent animal, was he?
Corky looked after Anglo. He had a lovely story, I'm sure Dan won't mind me telling you, but she told me later on when we were doing a party for him at the end that when he went to take Anglo to the Grand National, he asked Fred if he could take his girlfriend to the races with him, to come up to Aintree. It was an overnight stay.
That was the point of taking it, Nicky. But
Yes,
go on,
I think so.
Yeah.
And so Dan was duly allowed to go in the horse box. And Corky said to Dan, if Anglo wins the Grand National, we'll get engaged. He said, at 66 to 1, I thought I was fairly safe.
Bolted up too. Good Lord. Oh,
And there they are, still together. I mean, they're the greatest couple in the world. I love them both. And
he's as spry as anything, isn't he?
he is.
Yeah, unbelievable.
He is. I mean, we've all got older.
40 years working for you,
Yeah.
and he's fit and well and
Yeah.
full of beans.
I know.
Unbelievable. And what about the early good horses? What were the first ones?
Well, where we were lucky, the first horse I was ever asked to train by anybody was Zongalero.
Yeah.
And I got a letter from this very nice gentleman called David Montague. The horse was in training with Tom Jones,
Right.
who was really becoming Shape Hamdan's
Yes.
trainer at the time. So the
Tom
jumpers
Jones
were
used to turn up on the gallops at Newmarket, still in,
London dress.
being at Annabelle's all night.
Yes.
And had a sort of, dinner jacket on and things like that.
He was a great man, and he did. So I inherited Zongalero, actually, along with Steve Smith-Eccles.
Well, with one good thing comes a trial, but there you are.
And the idea was Steve would always ride him. Although Bob Davis was actually, I'd sort of thought I needed a rather very experienced. Bob was very, he was one of the best jockeys of the time. And
He was champion jockey, wasn't he, Bob, 1 year, I think? Did he
well, I
share it
think he
with
was.
Gifford?
Yeah.
No, I can't.
could have done. You're a great rider, Bob, a lovely guy. Yeah, but the act was to ride Zongalero, which he did. Unfortunately, he broke his neck, literally on the Monday of the Grand National. This is quite funny, but because he broke his... Well, it wasn't funny that he broke his neck.
Well, no, not
But I
terribly
had to...
amusing.
all of a sudden, I'm no jockey for the Grand National.
Yeah.
We go through the list of who's riding what.
Available lunatics.
Lunatics that are capable of going around there. And there was one name that was blatantly appeared not to have a ride, was Tommy Carberry.
Oh, now we're talking.
So I set about trying to find, I spoke to David Montague and said, look, Bob was going to ride Lucius, that he'd won on the year before.
Yeah.
So he couldn't ride, not that he'd ever ridden him before. But he was riding all our horses, but couldn't ride Zongalero because of Steve's arrangement. And I set about trying to find Tommy Carberry, and after 2 days I had to put a sort of advert in an Irish newspaper.
If anyone has
Will
seen
Tommy
Carberry,
Carberry, will he please ring N. Henderson? So I get hold of Tommy, who sort of vanished off the planet until about the Tuesday or the Wednesday of Aintree. And he finally rings up and, hi, what can I do for you? And I said, I wondered if you'd like to ride Zongalero in the Grand National, thinking he'd say, go on, love to.
bite your hand off.
Oh, gosh, wonderful. Well, I knew what the going rate was, for the jockeys always used to get a little extra for riding in
a
the
bun
Grand National.
is the word you're looking for, but yes.
Tommy sort of asked for something in the region of 10 times more than the going rate. To which I gulped a bit, and he said, well, to
He
be
obviously
very
had a
honest
tab
with you,
at the local to pay off.
he said, I'm too old for cheap thrills. So I went back to David. He said, well, I suppose we'll have to do this, will we? I said, well, I don't think we've got any option. So I said to Tommy, well, I'll tell you what, could you ever just come down to the racecourse on Saturday morning and have a sit on him? So at least you know what you're getting on in the paddock, which was probably a total waste of time anyway. So there we've got Tommy. Now, on the Friday evening...
And we are talking one of the great Irish jockeys of all time.
Who'd won on Liscargo, hadn't he?
Absolutely, yeah.
Friday evening...
Win on a rusty bike, you know.
Gordon Richards came up to me and he said, look, I'm going to tell you something. Lucius is lame and he won't be running tomorrow. So Bob is free.
Right.
So I owed it to Bob as my jockey
Yes.
to say, look, you know, Bob, would you step in? But I've got to get hold of Tommy. But can you come and ride him, sit on him in the morning, because you've never sat on him?
Don't both turn up to Cheltenham, do they?
Well, of course they do. But how was I going to find Tommy Carberry in Liverpool?
No,
there were only
not
400.
in a million
There's
years.
only 450 pubs and hotels.
Yes.
And where was I going to start?
Well, you start at A for the Adelphi and work through to Z for Zongalero.
So at 7:30 in the morning, I got 2 jockeys who turned up to ride Zongalero. I think Tommy was thrilled when I said, listen, I'll tell you what, that fee, we'll split it between you and you go home to bed.
Yeah.
And so Tommy retired.
He said,
to his
first
hotel.
time for 3 days, he said. Yeah.
He went back to bed, Bob rode Zongalero, and we finished second.
Yeah. And you thought, this is easy, we'll do it next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're still waiting. Nicky.
Zarovich was second, Classified was third, we had a few...
It's carelessness. You get so close and not...
We've won, I think, 6 or 7 Tophams.
Yeah, yeah.
And why is it so easy to go round once if you can't go round twice?
Yeah, because one's 2 miles and 3/4 and one's 4.5.
Correct.
And you don't know what you're doing. That's one of the problems. You were talking about Steve Smith-Eccles, a miner's son, I believe. Not many miners called Smith-Eccles, I don't suppose. But he was forever associated, obviously, with you, but with See You Then. Now, See You Then, triple champion hurdle winner, used to take one look at you and thought, I'm going to kill that so-and-so. He hated you, didn't he?
Hated me. He hated anybody in his stable, to be honest
Yeah.
with you. But, I mean, I think he had a wonderful lad called Glyn Foster.
Yes.
Who's sadly
Mush.
no longer with us.
No, no.
Oh, he was wonderful.
yeah.
And he looked after him. And, I mean, See You Then was, to all intents and purposes, savage. And he took great chunks out of me.
But he was good from early on, wasn't he, See You Then?
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
And another great legend, Frank Mann, bought him in Ireland.
Vet. Yes.
Who was my vet.
Legendary vet.
Absolutely wonderful man. And he bought him primarily to go to Italy. But he was allowed to stop off here to run in the Triumph Hurdle, which he did not win.
No.
Anyway, See You Then disappeared off to Italy, where he won the Gran Siepe di Catrano, which, would you believe, is the Italian Triumph Hurdle.
I'm very impressed with your
quite good,
linguistic
isn't it?
skills.
Yeah.
I know you can't
But
speak English, but obviously Italian's fine. You're good with pizza and spaghetti, and yet go on.
Unfortunately, he got a problem, and he came back to England for Frank to put him together. And so we were to get him ready to go out to Italy again. And we suddenly realised really how good he was.
What made you realise?
His hurdling technique was absolutely unbelievable. And I think I've learnt one thing, that we've been lucky with quite a lot of very good hurdlers, champion hurdle winners. 7, I think.
7,
and the one thing they've all been able to do was cross a hurdle quicker than anything.
At speed.
At speed. And See You Then could do this. We only ever schooled him once a year.
Really?
But his legs had got a bit of a clattering in Italy, I fear. And so Frank was sent back to Frank to mend, and we kept him. And basically we were heading for the champion hurdle, and Johnny was going to ride him, Frank. And he, I'll never forget it, he had a fall off a horse called the Reject in the Arkle, the race before.
Yeah.
Now, in between that sort of time, and Eck had started riding for us in Zongalero, Eck and I had fallen out about 3 times. I re-employed him and we fell out, and
His fault or yours?
But
Or his, of course.
I loved it a bit. He wasn't a Frankham on the schooling ground, I can tell you that.
No.
But
He was dead effective in the race.
I was very fond of him.
Ah.
But I had no control. Absolutely none whatsoever. And we were in a period when he wasn't riding for me at all. And after Johnny was hurt and said he couldn't ride in the next race, went into the weighing room, and there's only one soul left. So Beck and I decide we're good mates again, and off we go. And Judy wins. And he won 2 more. He won 3 on the trot.
Yeah, amazing. He was
so that sort of, we got remarried for another 4 years until sort of, I think his final
Till
drama...
you came to your senses again.
I think the final drama was one year when he'd won the Supreme Novice Hurdle on a horse called River Kyriog.
40 to 1?
Well, he was 40 to 1 because he was entitled to be 40 to 1. On the Sunday,
and he was trained by you, that would be another thing.
Sunday morning, he belonged to Bobby McAlpine, who was another wonderful character who we always stayed with.
A man who was famous for eating gulls' eggs.
Great.
Correct, right, go on.
And
there are 24 licensed collectors of gulls' eggs in the country, but that's another conversation. Go on.
I spent the whole of the Sunday morning before Cheltenham trying to persuade Bobby to run River Kyriog in a maiden at Wolverhampton on the Friday so that it would get to Aintree. It hadn't won a hurdle race.
No.
It had come from Barry Hills had him, and he came to us but had a leg on the way.
Who would ever buy a horse off Barry Hills?
But Bobby owned it then. He bred it.
Ah, right.
And it was called River Kyriog, which is his place. So we had him, and he hadn't won a hurdle race. I said, Bobby, you can't run this in the Supreme. It's a maiden. It always will be a maiden if we keep going at this rate, running it in the wrong races. And we talked about it. Anyway, I said, go to Wolverhampton on Friday night. You're stewarding there anyway, so you can get it sorted.
Fix the result.
Yeah, and then we'll go to Aintree, and he'll have a chance there, which is where we all stay. Well, finally, Bobby won the argument. We'll run in the Supreme. Right, fine. And I went first race as usual, went in to get the saddle off Steve. And Peter O'Sullivan was, as he was, he'd be sitting at the door with his colour chart, looking at the horses' names and looking at the colours and the name. He said, Nicky, how do you pronounce this horse's name?
Ceiриog, wasn't it?
Correct, absolutely correct. Very good. You got Welsh in you as well.
Yeah, River I can do too, but go on.
A River Kyriog. Peter said, how do you pronounce it? I said, Peter, I wouldn't worry, you won't have to mention it. It took it up 2 out.
Yeah.
He had 7 different stabs at pronouncing Kyriog, Kyriog.
Stuck with River, I think.
Yeah, stuck with River. It was quite extraordinary. But the problem was, Steve's greatest sort of story really was one night we were up at Aintree, and I arrived in time, walking in before the first race, and sort of everybody came to me, have you heard? Heard what? Oh, not say anymore.
I'm Nicky Henderson, I haven't heard anything.
Everything all right? Have you heard? I said, no, I know what's going on. Well, what had happened was that Steve, evidently the night before, was going out with the lovely Diane.
Oh, yes. As you would.
And unfortunately, I think they had a little bit of a tiff the night before.
Lovers' tiff.
And
exactly
he was locked out of the room, and he went to sleep in the back of the car.
He did.
And he wrapped himself up in some horse rugs and things and fell asleep. When he woke up, he was quite surprised to find the car was heading rapidly down the M6, or whatever road it was on.
A couple of scousers.
With somebody at the wheel. So he tapped this fella on the wheel and said, well, that surprised the driver quite considerably, because in stealing the car, he didn't realise he'd stolen a body as well, and didn't realise there was somebody in the back. So your man leapt out of the car and
probably doing 70 down there,
and set off across the countryside, leaving Steve with the car. And rather an embarrassing story to be told, which actually I think even he got on the front page of the Daily Telegraph with this shenanigans. But anyway, then River Kyriog got beaten, but I don't blame him on the night's antics. But there you go. Steve was a wonderful character, and we had great days.
Yeah. And See You Then, I've always been fond of him because you had a big collection of cashmere jerseys when See You Then appeared in the yard. But by the time he'd left, you didn't have a jersey without a hole in it. Because if you went in his box, he would just say, "Is that bloody Henderson again?" and have a go.
Well, I think he would. He'd have anybody. I think the best story of his sort of eating people was one year when he'd had his prep race before the champion hurdle. I think it was Haydock. He'd got in the night before and his legs were bandaged and poulticed, and it was all a matter of what his legs were going to be like on
together.
Sunday morning. And I knew I couldn't go in until Glyn came in at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning.
Because Glyn could deal with it.
But at 6 o'clock, oh, jeepers, I was sure he might be a bit tired after his race. He might let me into his box. You never know. And I might be able to take the bandages off. Probably unlikely, but I couldn't resist it any longer. So I went out into the yard. He lived right next door to the office. And I couldn't believe it. The stable door was open.
Joking.
I thought, what in the world is going on here? And I looked in the door, and beloved Frank Mann,
Yeah, the
vet,
vet. Yeah.
he had also decided at 6
He
o'clock
couldn't wait
that
any
he
longer.
couldn't wait till Frank Mann was sat in the manger. See You Then was just stood there. He pinned him to it, and he hadn't got a bandage off. He hadn't got a head collar on it.
He wasn't
hadn't
gonna move.
anything.
He wasn't
Frank
gonna move.
was just sat on the manger with his horse just. Got you. So I appeared at the back end. Well, don't forget, both ends worked.
Yeah.
He could bite and kick at the same time. So we had no chance.
See You and Then.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful stuff. He was a great animal, though, wasn't he?
Oh, he was. And yet, as soon as he was out of his box, he was a lamb.
Other than completely failing ever to train a Grand National winner, Nicky Henderson's kind of famous for speed horses over fences at the other end of the spectrum. And to me, the first great was Remittance Man, who I adored and who jumped like a dream.
He was completely opposite to the 2 milers we have now. There's these great, big, fabulous looking, solid horses. Remittance Man, I bought him one day in the Derby sale in Ireland when he was at Tattersalls.
And what did you pay for him? Can you remember?
I think about 18 grand or something,
Right,
which probably then was a long time ago. I remember coming
He
back
just
on the plane.
went under the mattress and pulled it out.
It was.
Yeah.
He was the most extraordinary horse. He was about as wide as that.
Yeah. Not unlike myself.
But he
really.
was an amazing athlete.
Again.
And I remember coming back on the plane with Josh Gifford. We were comparing the horses we liked, and Josh had
See, that
brought
was
a
a dry
horse-
old do coming back in the plane with Josh
It would
Gifford.
be, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Josh Gifford,
Yeah.
who was one of the greats. And we'd been at the sales for 3 days. I remember him saying he'd bought this horse, and I looked it up in my catalogue, and I'd drawn a picture of a boat at the top of the page. I didn't write B-O-A-T. I just drew a
No,
picture.
because you couldn't spell B-O-A-T,
No, I
but you
couldn't. I
could
just
draw
put a
one.
mic- That's what I thought of the horse.
Yeah, I know.
Just said, what did you think of that?
Boat.
I shut the book quickly because it said boat. and so he said, what did you buy? So I said, well, I bought that one and that one and that one. And he looked up Remittance Man. And he didn't have a lot to say about that was good either. No. Narrow gutted.
Yeah. Make a good garden rake.
Limited.
Yeah.
Didn't like it at all. We got him home, and he was the worst box walker you ever saw. He went round and round and round and round and round. It hadn't been declared, and to be honest with you, if I had any sense,
You'd have
could have returned it.
Yeah. But you haven't got any
luckily,
sense.
for once, I sort of went against common sense and kept him. But training him was entertaining because he certainly didn't need a trainer because he was training himself.
Yeah. We're doing 8 miles a day around his box.
Oh, just a million miles. I mean, he took a mouthful of food and ran round the box in a mouth. He was crackers.
We know a
sweet
few people
horse.
like that.
Yeah. And then we tried everything. We finally decided that it was companionship he needed.
Yeah.
And
We all decide that eventually in
yes,
life.
I know. But these geldings, that's not quite the same thing. And we did try Gauche. That was a mega mistake because I asked Barry Hills, I told Barry Hills I wanted to go. He said,
He said, I've got a few in
He
training.
said, I've got one you can have. I'll bring it down in the morning. This is when we were at Windsor House. And the next morning, one of his travelling head lads arrived in the yard with a goat, with a kid.
Kid at foot.
What?
Baby goat to you lot.
Baby goat. Well, what? He couldn't wait to get rid of it. He'd done me in. He did me up like a kipper. He got rid of this goat by giving it to me because I wanted the goat. It was no good to the horse because it had got the kid. And the kid had, I think it probably was meant to have twins. Anyway, I had to spend every morning and every night milking the goat. Well, if you've ever tried goat's milk, and when it's all over your clothes.
I've tried goat's milk, but I've never tried to milk one.
Yes, but you wanted to smell goat's milk when it's all over your clothes and everything.
No, thank you.
Then it got mastitis, then it got this, that and the other. I could have killed Barry. He's been my greatest friend for goodness knows
I used
how
to be
long.
terrified of him, and I've learnt to love him dearly. He's an amazing
Well, he's
guy.
great, but he stitched me up that time. The goat didn't work.
But he
so-
loved that. of
Oh, he
course.
loved it. Yeah. He'd
God,
won that
get
round.
rid of that goat to that idiot
He won
Henderson
that
down
round,
the road. Yeah,
and
yeah.
Henderson actually was stupid enough to ask for a goat, which was absolutely no good to anybody. We went into sheep with him, and actually they worked very well. And Dad was sort of 20 minutes away, and on the downs there was a flock of sheep, and so I went over.
Quite a big flock of sheep.
Oh, quite a big flock of sheep. I mean, they were all over the place. Anyway, we went. I said, all I want is one of the. I don't want a fatted lamb. I just want
Calves,
want
cow
a-
things,
I just
sheep
want
and lamb. Never mind.
Absolutely complete.
You went to Eaton. What the
Plonker.
hell do you expect?
So went and you've got anything you don't want. So we just plucked one out the field and brought it in, and that was Alan Lamb,
Alan.
who was a great mate of mine, a rather good cricketer. And,
Reasonable. Yeah.
and Alan Lamb, he survived a year. I mean, what we did is brought them in for a year. Horse went out for his summer holiday. Sheep went back to home.
Yeah.
And went out with his brothers and his sisters and his
It's
family.
quite complex for you to
Yeah.
organise, but yeah,
It
go on.
was, but then, so next year we went and got another sheep, brought it in. That was Ridley. It was a rather
Ridley
good,
Lamb.
good jockey
Famous
called Ridley
jockey
Lamb.
in the north, Ridley
So
Lamb.
Ridley was the second one.
Alan Lamb, Ridley Lamb, yeah.
I think Nobby was probably the third one. And Nobby was just any old lamb, sheep, picked out the field, put it in the box, everything tickety-boo. Nobby was great. Remittance Man liked Nobby. And they'd split up again for the summer, went to get the sheep back. And we brought another one in and put it in the box with him as the horse arrived back from his holidays. And this poor sheep sort of flew over the stable door in a cloud of wool,
Fleece and
everything.
yeah, whatever.
So, well, that wasn't very good. Opened the door, shoved the poor thing back in again, and it disappeared back out over the door. Well, this wasn't going to work.
No.
He did not like
You are
this.
quick on the uptake. I've always said that about you.
Yeah, and 2 goes was enough for this poor thing. So we took it back home, and I said, I want Nobby back. Well, we went out into a field. There were 300 sheep in a herd. They said, well, Nobby's in there. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
guess what?
But
I
you'd
mean,
be a stockman, you'd be able to spot Nobby immediately, wouldn't you? Yeah.
but we got
After 4 days, yes.
No, after one we couldn't find him. So what we did is actually was quite, and it was actually the most remarkable thing. We got a horse from home, rode it into the field, and rode it into the sheep. And 399 went one way and one came out.
Nobby.
Nobby. He knew what a horse looked like, and he thought it was his mate. So he came in, and he did about 4 years' service. And every summer he went back.
Be mutton, not sheep by then.
He very much.
Yeah.
And he had the best life in the world at the end of the day because he went racing quite regularly. He went to Cheltenham and Ascot.
Royal
and
Ascot,
Newbury.
yeah, probably, yeah.
Probably
Did
not
he
Royal
wear a
Ascot,
hat,
the
I
Remittance
think?
Man, no, but he got to go racing quite a lot and he got well fed. And he used to trot around the yard. He'd come down the road with Remittance Man. I mean, he'd wander all over the village. It was great stuff. Philip Blacker did a bronze of the horse and the sheep, and It was a wonderful.
But he
thing,
was some tool, Remittance Man, though, wasn't he?
He was the most athletic thing, and I think he was. I mean, there's a picture of him jumping the last fence in the Arkle.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd think it was the first fence in any race. It was extraordinary.
So memories of that great Pendle photo. Do you remember that?
I mean, I've never seen a horse stand off so far a fence. And he was only small, narrow, limited, but I ran him over hurdles for 2 years and couldn't win a hurdle race with him. I tried him at 2 miles, went to 3 miles even once. Shows how stupid I was.
Yeah, I forgot.
Never won a hurdle race with him. No. But he was fun. But he was the first of our sort of the 2 milers that have become rather sort of.
Oh, special isn't the word. I mean, Sprinter Sacre is a sort of a sacred name, to coin a phrase.
Well, he was.
And he did extraordinary things for you, the owners, but actually for us, the punters, the public. You know, we just learnt to love his exuberance and how special he was.
Well, he was public, wasn't he? He became public, and that's what made it. He was just the most beautiful horse you ever saw. Minty bought him in a job lot.
Yes, he did, didn't
about
he?
22 horses, I think. And Raymond Mole took the lot. And I was just very lucky they got distributed to various trainers. And I got this untried, never run, 4-year-old. And he was gorgeous. And he grew into the most beautiful thing. And he knew it. And he knew he was
He was
good.
A great strutter of
and
his
he
stuff.
Was the biggest swank
Oh,
you ever came across.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
But that was the great thing about him. He knew it. And he loved it. And he milked it. And that's what made him great.
And there are horses like that who kind of have that swagger and sense of their own importance. And I presume you try not to let them get carried away with it, but he was magnificent.
He just was, and I'm schooling him, and actually it's always been the same. Altior was the same, and I hate to say it now, and we have to sort of find the wood, because Shishkin's quite a good
there.
Shishkin's day is not far away, where he has to prove himself to be in the... You know, we always said, well, nobody will fill Sprinter shoes, but no sooner had he retired, Altior appeared on the scene, and how lucky can any boy be to have 2 horses like that, just dump, dump.
But you're such a twit, you see, because you say how lucky can you be. These horses don't come along here and think, I'll stay the night at 7 Barrows and pitch up in the morning and I'll do my own regime and everything. How do you keep the spark in a 2-mile chase? So you must be trying to keep the lid on them at the same time as wanting them to go exuberant and bonkers.
Yeah, you're right. They're frightening because of their sort of natural schooling them. I always found was the most frightening thing. Nico would just, or Barry, whichever it was, but Nico actually did all the work on sprint, and Barry just came over from Al and got him at the races. He did. That's not quite true. He was schooled him, but just turn him in, and Altior was the same. Just turn them in and let them see a fence, and the next thing is just gone. And it was terrifying watching it. And occasionally, there would be people here. We did probably never school them more than twice a year because I was too frightened to do it. And I wasn't going to teach them anything, so what was the point? No. When people did see it, they didn't. They appreciated it. They had seen something absolutely unique.
What was your favourite Sprinter Sacre moment?
Oh, his last champion chase was the day. Funny enough, the first time was the Schlur chase.
Oh.
That autumn.
Yeah.
When he'd been away, he'd been out of it for a year and a half. Yeah. And there were plenty of pundits saying to Henderson, why don't you finally give the horse the best and retire him? You've lost him. You've fluffed it up. You've done everything. He'd had a fibrillating heart and we'd had all sorts of problems. When he won the Schlur, which was his comeback.
And we both able to Schlur late in the afternoon.
Well.
Yeah.
But that was a special day. But the champion chase day, I have never in my whole of racing seen a crowd like that. It was just pure magical, and as you know, I can get quite emotional about these things.
Unlike me. Yeah.
And that was the one day one we'll never ever forget. The world went crazy, and it was the sort of day, you know. And I always said he took the roof off Cheltenham that actually Dad had put on it.
Yeah, that's yeah, absolutely right. And you think of all those tens of thousands of people, Nicky, who block those days off in the calendar each year, be it in Cornwall or Kirkcaldy or Kent or Cork.
Yeah.
And we all go there. Yeah, I'll write it down for you. There's lots of season Ks. Clot. We all go there in the hope of seeing those pieces of magic woven for us. And we've seen them in, obviously, Gold Cups and Champion Hurdles. But a 2 mile chaser in full cry around there is almost shockingly exciting, isn't it? And people just love it. And that day was amazing afternoon. Yeah.
It was. I mean, it was one of the great comebacks, wasn't it? I mean, it was a remarkable comeback.
And we move on. You've got this extraordinary beast, Shishkin, and we're not going through a catalogue of Henderson runners at the festival, but he's always struck me as kind of different. And I thought the other day when he won against Willie's horse, I thought he was very good that day, because I don't think the race fell right for him, but he still won it.
It was a great race, and it was the race that everybody wanted. They locked horns and they did battle. I'd said the week before, I said, there are only going to be 2 people that are not going to enjoy it
You
today,
and Willie
and
Mullins.
it's going to be me and Willie. Willie kindly said afterwards, actually said, Nicky said exactly the right thing a week ago, when he said, there are only going to be 2 of us that won't enjoy it, and one of us ain't going to enjoy it afterwards either. But we're good mates, and there's nothing
he's
in
an
it.
extraordinary fellow. He really is.
Quite
He's
extraordinary.
absolutely fabulous.
It's a good night, Al.
Oh, it's a fine man for that. The Lord Bagnall at 3 a.m.
Yes.
I think they opened then. I'm not sure they opened.
They hope for Willie.
But you know, you've also had some savage criticism from alleged pundits and experts like myself who've ridden so many Cheltenham winners about when you haven't sent a horse out to a particular race. And in a sense, that confrontation has been deflated by the absence of a horse. I know that hurts you very much, because you only act in the interest of one thing, the horse.
Well, you're absolutely right. There have been 2 sort of such issues, and it all actually goes back to one. When, with Altior, when I'd said we would try him over 2.5 miles, the beginning of his last season, and we wanted to go 2.5, we'd try it. We said we'd go to Ascot. The mistake was, A, it was first time out, and B, that Paul Nichols was determined to go there with a horse called Sarname, who was a sort of big coming threat to Altior. And we both stood our guns. First time out, it was bottomless. And it was a 2-horse race. And under normal circumstances, I would have taken Altior out. I couldn't. Because of the
Why couldn't you?
Because there were only going to be 2 runners, and then there'd only be 1. And the whole world had come to see this match.
Fine.
I thought, I can't do it to Ascot, I can't do it to racing, we've got to do it. And actually, we wrecked both horses that day. We really did. So when it came to his first run the next year, and it was heavy ground for the Tingle Creek, I took him out on the morning of the race and got some serious flack.
Dog's abuse.
From serious people that maybe can write, maybe can argue their case, but know nothing about horses. And I think that's where it really gets you, the people that don't understand horses. I don't suppose they've ever really been in a racing yard as such.
Give me a horse to look after Monday lunchtime, be dead Wednesday tea time.
Yeah.
You know, I know that.
They're stats people, and it was very unpleasant. And it
And
really...
it goes to your very heart, Nicky, doesn't it? Because you have a responsibility to owners, to the horse principally, I come back to that point, but also you've always recognised a duty or an obligation to the public, and you hate letting them down.
I hope we have.
And then to get rounded on by everyone, of course there's a bandwagon
It wasn't
effect.
everybody, Alastair,
No,
to be
not
fair.
everyone,
There
but-
was only one or two.
Yeah.
90% of them are great. It's only one or two. But again, it happened this year when I wasn't happy with Shishkin, and I thought, I knew I wasn't 10 days before the race. So I thought, well, I'm not going to wait till 2 days before. I can say, now, listen, I want to leave him alone for fortnight and get him back. He's not right. And so I announced 10 days before the race that that Shishkin wouldn't be going to Sandown. So there were going to be no disappointments and no nothing. Well, the same people pitched their heads above the parapets again, same interview, same microphone, and wanted to hammer hell out of you. You're running scared. All you're doing is keeping him for Cheltenham. You don't dare run him. You won't take him on. You
What
won't
do you
have
think
a battle.
you're doing to the game?
Yeah. Just, and he wasn't wrong. He was sick. Well, the horse was trying to tell me that. That's my job. And he was wrong. And to be fair, if I'd have run him in the Tingle Creek, you wouldn't have had the Clarence House. No. Now, where was the best race? We got him back for the Clarence House, which was the race of the year, and I thought that was sort of slightly QED, actually.
How do you manage not to lose your temper? I know in the old days, 20 years ago, we always used to show it's February, Henderson will be flying around the ceiling, it's Cheltenham soon, it'll be a nightmare, let's not talk to him. But how do you retain your equanimity under the sort of abuse you get on those?
Because we don't get abuse. I mean, those are just the two examples of it.
Fine.
I think the only thing that was disappointing, and there were only two people who were really blatantly doing it, and neither of them had after the Clarence House, neither of them had I would have said the decency.
Or manners.
To say, you might have been right, or well done, it was a good race. They never showed up. No. They were very conspicuous by their absence after the race, but so be it. The horse does the talking for me. I enjoy doing what we're doing today. We're now in this session where we're doing previews or interviews or programs every single night.
Day.
We have got press and television here every single morning next week.
Get the place steam cleaned every afternoon, yes, I know.
But Nicky, I enjoy it.
I know, and you become very polished at it. But polish suggests a sort of sheen of superficiality. Well, that isn't you, because your passion for this shines through. And a couple of years ago, at the festival with your agreement and your wife Sophie's, I introduced into the equation the fact that your eyesight was failing. And the time was chosen very carefully because it was Cheltenham week and too many things going on. They weren't going to write a piece, other people write pieces about, oh, Nicky can't see as well as he could. And we kind of sneaked it in and got away with it. But how restrictive is it for you? So what do you do on the gallops? You know,
That works well. To be fair, the one thing it does, a lot of things it does affect.
Like being able to see. Yeah,
yes.
That's kind of an important thing.
Yeah, but fun enough, of what I do here with the horses, it really doesn't affect the job. I mean, we start in the morning, we trot them all round in the covered ride we have.
Yeah.
We trot them round. I mean,
Seen it
my
many a
vision
time.
is there to there. But I mean,
But it's like that,
that's
isn't
that.
it? Yeah.
But that's in that I can still tell you whether it's lame or it's not lame.
Right. And of course, in the box.
In the box, I can walk into its box and see it as well as I could ever see it.
Yeah.
And I can tell you whether it looks right or it looks wrong. And I feel its legs, well, that's feel, not sight. On the gallops, binoculars are great. My greatest asset really is Charlie Moore.
Charlie Moore,
who's by my side
Yeah.
the whole day. Not to sort of mind that stone,
Yeah,
don't trip
yeah,
over that.
yeah.
I drive round
Don't break
the
your
place.
white stick
He
and
actually
all
has
that,
to
yeah.
sit in the passenger seat
Yeah.
as I drive a wrecked vehicle all over the downs.
I know the vehicle well.
I
yes.
hit trees and bump into posts quite regularly.
No, the trees jump out at you. Come on, let's be fair.
I can't go on a road, but I don't need to because we stay on the place. With that, he's very good because he actually, before they're getting to me, before they come to my site, so-and-so on the left, so-and-so on the right, and so-and-so in the middle.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I know exactly what's going to come into my vision.
But you still only got that.
No, with the binoculars I can see from
yeah,
a long way.
yeah,
So when we're on the gallops,
Yeah.
I have the binoculars. And with them I can see most things. They don't work on a race course. I'd find it much easier to watch a race on a nice big television.
Preferably with the nose pressed to it pretty well. You know, let's face it.
Well, correct.
Yeah,
I do see better the closer I get to it.
And-
But it's boring. Then there's a lot of, reading, it's great. I have very good machines.
You went to Eaton, you can't read anyway.
Can't read anyway. Can't
you
spell,
want those
can't write.
audio
My
things.
writing's gone gazonk because you can't read what you've written. But it's a nuisance.
You sent me that nice letter the other day, Alastair, you are such a prat. I mean, that was spelt perfectly. You know?
Listen, I could do without it. It's sad at times because I know it's never going to get better. All we're trying to do is try and stabilise it and stop it deteriorating. There's all sorts of people trying. I don't think anybody's exactly succeeding, and it will continue, I fear, to... but it's sad, and you only really realise when you go somewhere that you haven't been to for a year, and you suddenly realise, I could see that last year, now it's that's
Fuzzy.
gone. And but there's...
You make very light of it, but...
You have to, I think actually because it's come on very steady, it's just, it grows, you get used to it. The sadness is that I know it's not going to get any better and wonderful views and sights and things that I'm not going to see again. And the most frustrating thing is, funny enough, and it goes with it, and the booklets, if you like, on the subject, I tell you, the one thing you can't see is people's faces. And
you're
people
lucky
think
in this
I'm being...
case, but yeah.
Well, I'll be very honest with you, right now, if you didn't talk at all, I wouldn't know who you were.
No.
Now, it's completely different with a horse. People's faces, I cannot see.
I don't want you feeling my legs, by the way.
Don't you worry.
But
people think I'm being rude because I could walk past them.
Yeah.
And I don't say hello
well, you
or
walk
acknowledge
past
them.
what you can't see.
But
let's face it.
I don't know who they are.
But Nicky, despite that problem, your passion and enthusiasm. When I first met you a million years ago, I thought another toff who somebody's given a yard to train horses with. But what always strikes me about coming to Seven Barrows is it's a family. The horses are part of the family, but people of every race, gender, whatever, are happy working here because you somehow encompass them all. They're important to you as the public are.
I think it is. The place is special. I'm very lucky. I mean, one can't see very well. So absolutely brilliant because
she's a legend.
She does mind me like nothing on earth. And she knows what I can cope with and what I can't cope with. I'm very lucky I have Neil that drives me. But,
Yeah.
Because I obviously can't drive anywhere. Well,
No.
if you see me coming, get out of the way quick, for goodness sake. But
Always did when you could see. Let alone.
But the team you have here, they're all part of a family. Most of them live on the place. And, you know, we have just a great, happy family.
There's no accident.
And, you know, we all enjoy, we've got good days and you have bad days. We've got to enjoy the good days, we've got to get over the bad days. I think that is the whole secret of the game, actually. Enjoy.
Yes.
We're doing it to try and make it fun for other people, the owners. It's their hobby. It's got to be fun. We've had some fun days, haven't we?
Just a few. And more to come. Nicky, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Alastair.
You did a brilliant job there, Mr. Henderson. You're such a tart for a camera these days.